Matt, you're obviously best known as a rugby player, but tell us a little bit about your sporting background. What sports you played growing up as a kid.
As a kid, I think my parents had a big focus on all their kids, playing some kind of sport. For me, athletics. I started from under sixes through to I was 15. Cricket, rugby league was a big one. I played a little bit of AFL, soccer occasionally because my best mate played, so I'd only fill in every now and then. And rugby union.
Right. When you say your family, obviously your father played rugby league at a reasonable level. Has his influence on you sort of carried on throughout your career?
No, I think just getting us involved in sport early has made not only me but my whole family quite competitive. I think it's not so much what my father has said or done, it's just being around him from an early age. He did play rugby league, so I always had a football in my hand. I was always around his guys. I'd go to his trainings after school because they'd train late at night. So it was just an environment that I enjoyed. I liked being around the boys and they have fun. They're both, they're trying to get a common goal. You're all working towards something, and for that, it was something that I enjoyed.
What, in terms of when you're growing up, how did you approach, your goal setting and that sort of influences on your career to make sure you can achieve, the incremental steps?
When I was young, I just played for fun. There was no real goal setting for me. It was just, I'd play each week. So on a Saturday, I'd be playing my rugby union because it was enforced on me at the school, and then on Sunday, I'd get my fun and I'd play rugby league. So it was more just, I really enjoyed playing sport. So there was no real goal setting for me. It was just go out, have fun. For my parents, I think it was important for me to give everything. Like after a game, they know if I didn't try. They weren't one of those pushy parents, but they also didn't want me to be someone that had just cruised through and not give 100% in everything I did, whether it was schooling or sport.
Yeah. When you sort of realised you were going to make a career out of rugby, did that change your mindset? And if so, what do you look for in terms of then being recruited to the Brumbies? What attracted you to them?
Well, when I was younger, I think when you're playing a sport, you feel like I always thought, being a sportsman would be something I'd be interested in. It'd be easy to do. And for me, it turned out I was really, really fortunate. For me, I was in the Australian Sevens, and I was picked in the Australian Sevens out of nowhere through one training camp. Eddie Jones, who was the national coach of the Wallabies at the time, and I'd had nothing to do with any province, any Super Rugby, any under-21s, any under-19s, just Australian Sevens. Eddie Jones came to one of our training sessions. Luckily for me, he liked the way I trained. I'm not sure what I did, but there was something there that he liked. At the end of that season, he picked me for the Wallabies. So it was before I had a chance to think about Brumbies, before I had a chance to think about anything. I was involved in a Wallaby end-of-season tour, so my case is a pretty special one where I didn't have the opportunity to think about, this is something that I want to do. Yeah. But then as soon as I got picked then, from there it was obviously something that I focused on and I wanted to be a part of.
So when did you, then, after that, coming back in, playing for the Brumbies, how do you approach the difference of playing footy with your mates in the park to deciding it is a career that you're going to actually fulfil and go on with?
I think the biggest thing for me was sacrifices. At the time, playing with your mates is good and it's great fun and you get your enjoyment, but like you say, you're not going to be able to make a career out of it because of, I suppose, the choices you make as far as partying, your birthday parties. I missed a lot of my 21st birthday party was spent in a Wallaby camp, where I had to train that morning, that night. I had one beer with the national coach that night, and then had to train again, fitness again in the morning. So they're little sacrifices I think you've got to make. If you decide you really want something, then you've got to work for it. It's not going to be easy, and for me that was probably the biggest thing, was that I had to sacrifice a lot of fun with my friends to be able to make it.
When you're a Wallaby and you are playing rugby at the top level, what surprised you about the game in terms of either where it was played, where it was picked up, or certain experience that I guess, especially as a young guy, caught you off guard, the scale of the game?
That's a tough one for me because when I came in, I didn't know anyone. I had no background. I've come straight from club rugby to the Wallabies. and everything was huge for me. Getting a flight, your own, sitting in business class, like little tiny things were massive for me. I think preparation for... The biggest thing for me was probably being able to prepare, not just for a game. Like for a game you can prepare, but being prepared for training. So if you learn something on a Monday that you know, or if they're teaching you something on a Monday, a movement or something, by Tuesday, the next training session, you should know it straight away. And if you didn't know it, the senior players had come down on me. So that was a big learning curve. For me, was just to be prepared. I suppose how to prepare for a game. I learned a lot through the senior players. I was very fortunate to have some real big names around when I first came in the Wallabies.
That's my next question. Then who has an influenced you as a player or a coach? A lot of young guys pick up sort of whether it be a father or a coach or a trainer somewhere along the line that has an ongoing influence on them. Did you have guys like that figured in your career?
Yeah, I think everyone, it's family, like they obviously play a huge part. But besides my family, as far as players, very early on, the senior players like Stephen Larkin was one who was, although he's such a nice guy, genuine guy, he was quite hard on me at times. George Gregan was incredibly hard on me, and to get the best out of me. So they'd make sure that I prepared well for training, that I knew my movements. If I missed a tackle, even if another player missed a tackle, it was much bigger for me to miss a tackle because I was coming through. They just taught me to respect the values of the group, and also to know my role within that team and to perform it the best I can. And if I let them down, or if I let myself down, I'm letting them down. And that was just something for me that I really took on board, that I wanted to play well. The best I played, obviously the best you can serve your teammates.
Change of direction a little bit, but as a professional athlete, some athletes have agents, some don't. What do you look for when you are having an agent? What experience have you had, good and bad, that allow you, you'd pass on to other guys that or girls might be looking to engage someone and why they should and what they shouldn't?
I've had a shocking experience with an agent, so it's very tough for me until I think people that come out of nowhere that you've never heard anything about, you need to be careful of. You just need to... The biggest thing is to do proper research, to ask players that probably were looked after by a certain agency before, and if they're not with them anymore, then why? Because I often find if you ask a player that's currently recruited by that agent, he's generally going to be reasonably happy, or he's not going to say anything too bad for you. So just I think to do your due diligence, to research on the agent. For me, looking back on it, I could have got by with just my father helping me out. The agency wasn't something that I desperately needed or craved, but to come overseas because I had no background or history, I didn't know too many people over here, then an agency for me was something that I did need to get me an opportunity over in France.
Another off the field thing, obviously you've had a bit of exposure with different sponsors and you've got some certain long-term relationships. How do you find working with a sponsor as part of being a professional athlete?
It's certainly a luxury, I think, for a player. If you're able to get a sponsor through doing what you love, then you're very fortunate. And through that, I think if you can build some kind of like a relationship, a long-serving relationship. Like for me, I've been quite fortunate to have Adidas for a long time. They've looked after me, and not just me, but my family, quite well. So for me, it's important just to represent that brand well, to establish that strong relationship, and then hopefully continue that.
Sort of jumping back to obviously around Sporple questions, what advice do you give sort of young players when they're coming either through school or they're just finishing school and they're looking to join a club? And this is not necessarily at a professional level, but in terms of what they should look for in terms of a club setup or a coach or that sort of thing in terms of making the right decisions.
There's a few things that you can look at. One being an opportunity. If you're a young player and you need to play, look for a club that isn't glittered, I suppose, with stars and that are actually seeking a position that you're after. If you're desperate to play. If you're desperate to learn, then you look for a club that has that experience. That can pass certain things on to you, where you can bide your time a little bit before you get your opportunity, and you can just serve your apprenticeship as far as learning as much as you can. And I think the culture is also another big one. If you can find the club with a good culture as far as they stick by their players, they represent their players quite well, they're loyal. You look at players that have stayed at the club for a long period of time, and often you'll find a good culture within that club.
In terms of obviously the Sporple platform, what are key things that you think young players need to represent themselves with online? You know, maybe the footage or the presence on there in order to give themselves the best opportunity for recruitment.
Well, I think footage is one. You know, players. If a club's looking for a player, they want to be able to see what they're going to buy or what they're going to invest in. So your footage is one. Your interest, I think. To show that I think for me, if I was looking for a player, someone with strong kind of family values, someone that would be quite loyal, a person that that has history, I suppose, of staying with one club for a long period of time, or someone that does like to invest his time into a club, you know, that'll obviously benefit that club. So, you know, your highlights and things like that.
One piece of advice you'd give yourself if you were 13?
13? Wow.
You're a 13-year-old Matt Giteau, not knowing what's in front, but then seeing obviously what you've achieved now. In order to make sure that happens, what would you say to yourself?
For me, I'd be very thankful for what my parents did. You know, because now I know obviously what I've done, and well, not what I've done, but you know, that I've had the opportunity to play rugby, you know, as long as I had, and where I've travelled. But I think the fact that my parents put me into a private school early because I was misbehaving, so I continued to misbehave early, so they put me into this private school. And at this private school, they made me play rugby union, which was a sport I hated. And then from there, I learned to love the game, and then it took me all around the world. So.